Host Zach Viscomi, and excited to be introducing today Laura Stover, the CEO of LS Wealth Management. Laura, thank you for joining me today.
Hey, it's good to be here, Zach. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want you to tell me a little bit more. Obviously, in the financial services industry, that can mean a whole lot of stuff. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about you and what it is that you do?
Well, thank you for having me. I've done this for about 23 years, but I want to help people retire successfully, but to be able to sustain their retirement. We're a full-fledged financial planning wealth management firm based out of Northwest Ohio.
I know that we were talking a little bit earlier. You've got a really fascinating story. So you were a concert pianist, and you did a lot of traveling and things like that. And so what transitioned you into working in the financial services industry?
Well, I've been blessed to have two careers, and after my sister was married and had children, I always wanted to pursue business. So financial services, wealth management, being an entrepreneur, starting my own company was a dream come true. And starting that about 23 years ago, it's just grown. I've been blessed. I am privileged to help and work with people on a daily basis. And we have two offices in Northwest Ohio, but I also work with people across the country. My podcast has reached a lot of people. I've built my practice on education, always aspiring to learn, and the challenges today are ever changing. So I think it's important to have that message resonate, especially if you're looking forward to retiring or maintaining retirement. Everything is very, very different, especially in recent years.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned your podcast, which you're very humble, obviously, and you don't talk much about it. But I mean, you've had like 85,000 monthly downloads today, so which obviously is growing. And so obviously you do take educating people very passionately, and that's clear that you give back in that way. So can you tell me a little bit more, sort of who the podcast is targeting, and then even more so, like, let us in on some of your process, like what it is that you do to actually help people.
The Retirement Talk podcast is on all the platforms these days, so when you're on your elliptical, you can listen to us.
How'd you know?
I think people resonate with understanding complex issues in a simplified fashion that they can relate to. People want to know what is going to make a difference now in my financial life. How do I keep my capital? How do I grow my accounts? How do I pay the least amount in taxes, the least amount in fees? So we really try to bring in industry experts and the forethoughts and leaders in our country today as guests on the podcast, and we're just growing leaps and bounds. My colleague co-hosts the show with me when I can capture him, and 85,000 downloads and plus, and so we're just blessed. But the Retirement Talk podcast was kind of grown from my process, which is redefining wealth. And that's our proprietary process that we, quite frankly, walk every client through, because there's 6 key areas in your financial life. And we need to have all of these areas be able to integrate and coordinate together. So no matter who you are, and this is the thing that we try to educate clients on, you have to have the proper balance within these 6 key planning areas. There's 6 key risks. In the 23 years I've done this, that I've identified that all of us will face at some point in time. Income planning, liquidity, tax planning, being proactive with your tax planning, not waiting until there's a tax problem, but mitigating taxes, having the health care plan, having the investment strategy. All of those pillars coordinate together, and that redefining wealth process provides a framework for all of that to navigate around and making sure that the client has a comprehensive plan within all of the body of those 6 key pillars.
Yeah, and you're very clearly a talented person, whether you're playing piano or you're helping people with their finances. But especially with finances, I mean, we're sitting here in New York City with all the, all the buzz and everything behind us. But we think about, the economy right now, right? And we're looking at the stock market just being super volatile. And a lot of people who's especially like pre-retirees, but even retirees now are like, really worried about, are they going to have enough to keep moving forward? So how do you kind of address some of those issues as they present themselves?
Well, having that plan within that framework, there's going to be good and bad economies. And yes, this year, as we're recording this, 2022 has been very volatile. And just as important is the inflation issue. So that's why everyone needs a solid income plan, really knowing your cash flow and your budget. We walk people through our proprietary process, the Redefining Wealth process, but the Life Arc planning system, which is a tool where everyone can input their information and have that cash flow, have that budget. If you're taking money out of an account today, you're add 10% to your investments. A 10% increase, that's a substantial increase over, if you're taking out $50,000 a year, that's a little over $400 or $500 a month increase in cost. So that's why it's important to really have a flexible plan, one that can adapt and change, because you're right, the economy is always going through these ups and these downs, and there's different black swan events at different points in time. And all we can do is have the best plan in place that's adaptive, that we can make sure that we have that framework, so no matter what comes, next year could be another crisis, next year could be another bull market, next year could be a very bad recession. That is yet to be determined. But with that plan, people at least can navigate through the challenges that we're facing today. Higher interest rates, high inflation, not a good recipe.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, and you touched on a few times here too, it's not just right now. So obviously the economy is today what it is today, but these are principles that you've been using for over 20 years now that have helped people through the ups and the downs. And so the strategy in the moment will shift to be adaptive, like you said, but overall it's really the same practices in place. And I know we were talking earlier and you mentioned how we live in a culture of saving.
Yeah.
Where, and even myself included, right, where we're taught that we just need to put money away, like we're a squirrel waiting for winter, right? And that's not really a great strategy. And then once you get to a point where you want to retire, it's kind of like, well, now what do I do?
Yeah.
And so you work with a lot of your clients in that area. So can you tell me a little bit more about kind of the next phase that they'll be moving into?
That's a good and important point. We work on saving and accumulating, and everyone can relate to money coming in out of your paycheck, going into a 401k, buy low, sell high, save, put more money in your retirement plan. But you have to really have a fundamental change in mindset once you eye retirement. If you're 5 to 7 to 10 years ahead or in retirement, now it's distribution and income planning. It's not all about accumulating. So the way you invest really has to change as well. It has to change from a standpoint of not just focusing on rate of return, but dollars preserved when you have volatility, employing some tactical management, blending with the strategic, making sure we're partitioning our money off into sections, growth monies that we need because we're all living longer, Lord willing, and making sure we have income that's not going to be affected by the market, and not relying on one source, because that's true diversification, and that's really that mindset and shift that everyone needs to not invest the same way that you do when you're accumulating, but taking the least amount of risk and garnering the most return that you need to be successful, and making sure that you really have that reined in, especially during times like we've seen this year.
Yeah, and as you said before too, and I imagine that you've got to have a very unique approach for each one of your clients. It's got to be really tailored to what their needs are, as you said. And so you do offer more than just the financial services, like you mentioned earlier, with the tax mitigation. And so, you're just doing so many different things to help your clients and make an impact in their lives. I would be interested, Do you have an example maybe of somebody that you've worked with that just kind of pops into your mind that you were able to sort of do that for?
Well, an example would be a client that came on recently about 6 months ago, very successful client, kind of a unique situation. And she's accumulated and done very, very well for themselves, but she had no tax plan for the amount of non-IRA accounts that she had. There was a lot of concentration, tech heavy, that's gotten hit hard in 2022. A lot of sector risk with airline stocks, to be exact, and no plan on how to kind of untangle from that without accruing a large amount of capital gains. So we're able to go through with some of the specialists that we work with, portfolio managers, what can we trade in kind? What makes sense to keep in that portfolio? Where do we take that volatility off the table, but also manage the tax risk? Sometimes that's a double juggling act, and people don't really think about some of those things. She understood that we have some potential tax ramifications, but I need to rein in my volatility because losing too many dollars was more costly than the potential tax. So there's a plan that we put in place to untangle that a little bit each year while we're in lower tax brackets now. She's actually looking at long-term capital gains tax, which is still relatively low today, but that's subject to the government eyeing possibly down the road with things. So that does come to mind, and being able to be proactive with the volatility and the risk management plus the tax management in that instance, and making sure you are positioned properly. At some point, she's going to need to take income out of those accounts. So we want to make sure she's in the most tax-favored position possible.
Yeah, that's great. And you've touched on this a couple times, but just your ability to be able to help people in the later parts of their life, in the times where they're not really thinking about those things, that everything that I've accumulated now I have to live off of, and what's the best way to do that so that I don't get punished over and over again by the government or whoever who wants to also put their hands into their pocket. So. So can you, if somebody was interested in finding out a little bit more about what it is that you do or how they could work with you, what would be the best way to get into contact with you?
Go to redefiningwealth.info, and you can click on there to schedule a quick chat, just like what we're doing here. And there's even a calendar there, if I'm not mistaken, and they can book a time frame that works for them. And redefiningwealth.info also has archives of all the shows, so there's a lot of resources to go to. Check it out, and that will point people in a good direction to get some resources as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and one more question for you here, and I ask everybody this since I have the opportunity to interview some really amazing and successful people like yourself. What would be your tip or advice for either an upcoming generation or yourself, maybe even 20, 30 years ago, as far as like success and even what people should be doing now to prepare for the future?
It's nothing new on the advice. I wish I could invent new advice, but start saving early. Trying to do it later sets you back. The earlier you start, even within your budget with a smaller amount, that power of compound, that power of the compounding penny story that we've all heard. Yep. Start early and read. There's so much out there to educate today. There's a lot of resources. There's a lot of books. Start early.
So Laura, thank you so much for joining me today. I mean, it was a pleasure listening to you and your passion behind wanting to help people plan for those later years in their lives and just reframe their thinking about how to do that. And hang on to as much as they possibly can along the way. So really a pleasure having here today, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on another episode of Times Square Today.